The champagne flute shattered in my grip. Federal fraud alerts screaming from my phone. My CTO just wiped our servers and vanished. Now I'm cornered in a service hallway, a mercenary's knife at my throat, while the board's wire picks up every desperate word I say. One flash drive in my pocket holds the proof I'm not alone in this. But Sarah's standing there, her coat hiding the recorder, and the elevator's opening. Too late. The crystal rim of a vintage baccarat flute bit into Marcus Thorne's palm. Around him, the Pierre Hotel penthouse hummed with the mechanical laughter of venture capitalists and the cloying, clashing scents of expensive saffron risotto and overbloomed gardenias. The floral perfume was so thick it felt like breathing through a funeral shroud. David Miller stood 10 feet away, bathed in the amber glow of a massive chandelier, radiating the effortless, oily confidence of a man about to mint $1 billion. A sharp vibration pulsed against Marcus's thigh, a rhythmic intrusion that felt like a heartbeat. He slipped the device from his tuxedo pocket, shielding the glare with his body. The screen's light stung his eyes, displaying a cascade of red notifications from the SEC internal portal. Discrepancy detected. Aegis Cloud Solutions Q3 revenue. His thumb hovered over the glass. A second alert followed, tethering the fraudulent entries directly to David's private server. Marcus took a shallow breath, the air thick with the metallic tang of high-end air conditioning. He scanned the room, catching the eye of a junior partner who raised a glass in a silent toast. David turned, his smile broadening as he gestured for Marcus to join the circle of waiting reporters. The architect of our success. David's voice boomed, cutting through the string quartet's melody. He clapped a heavy hand onto Marcus's shoulder, the fabric of the bespoke wool suit bunching under the pressure. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them how we built the fortress. The phone remained heavy in Marcus's grip, a cold weight against his skin. He tucked the device away, the screen still bleeding crimson light through the silk lining of his pocket. He forced his features into a mask of professional poise, though his mind was a ledger of rapidly mounting losses. If he spoke now, the IPO collapsed. If he waited, he became an accomplice. David's grip tightened, a silent command disguised as a brotherly embrace. Marcus stepped into the spotlight, the flashbulbs blinding him before he could find the words to save his own life. The heat of the stage lights felt like a physical interrogation. Marcus could hear the frantic tapping of his own heart, a sound he feared was audible to the microphones clustered before him. He looked at David, noticing for the first time a frantic twitch in the man's left eyelid. David wasn't just celebrating. He was vibrating with a manic energy. Every few seconds, David's hand went to his wrist, tapping the glass of his watch 3 times. 1, 2, 3. As if syncing his pulse to a countdown only he could hear. Marcus realized with a jolt of ice in his chest that the primary servers weren't just experiencing a glitch. The red alerts on his phone weren't a warning. They were a post-mortem. David had vanished from the ballroom an hour ago, purportedly to check a minor connectivity issue in the server room. He had returned with that predatory grin, but the data was hemorrhaging. The valuation of Aegis, currently sitting at a staggering $4 billion, was a house of cards leaning into a hurricane. We built Aegis on the principle of absolute transparency, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the roar in his ears. The lie tasted like copper. He felt the phantom weight of his lucky silk socks, the ones with the coffee stain on the ankle, and prayed the superstition held. He needed to get out of this room. He needed to find a terminal. If he could reach the secure line in the service wing, he could perhaps scrub the digital trail before the federal task force, already rumored to be circling the Pierre, made their move. He excused himself with a practiced, charming nod, claiming a need to check the final opening numbers. As he turned, he saw Sarah Johnson, his executive assistant, standing by the hors d'oeuvres table. Her wide, trusting blue eyes followed him. She looked pale, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the edge of a mahogany sideboard. "Oh, sorry," she whispered to the wood as her hip brushed it. It was a habit that usually made Marcus smile, a quirk of her endless politeness. But tonight, it felt like an omen. Marcus didn't stop. He pushed through the heavy velvet curtains that separated the gilded ballroom from the utilitarian veins of the hotel. The transition was a violent shock. The scent of gardenias vanished, replaced by the sterile ozone smell of the industrial HVAC system. The hum of the massive fans vibrated through the floor, rattling Marcus's teeth. He hurried down the service corridor, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the white linoleum. He reached the door to the secondary server hub, his fingers trembling as he reached for the keypad. But before he could touch the plastic, a shadow detached itself from the doorway. A man in a charcoal security uniform, built like a brick wall with a neck thicker than his head, stepped into his path. The guard didn't move to help. He stood with his arms crossed tightly, creating a physical barrier. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "The board has requested that you remain in the ballroom for the duration of the event." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't hotel security. The man's posture was too rigid, his eyes too sharp. He recognized the type, a corporate mercenary, the kind Eleanor Vance hired when she wanted discreet oversight. "I'm the CEO of this company, James," Marcus said, reading the name tag that looked too new to be real. "I go where I please." He tried to brush past, but James didn't budge. Instead, the man began to hum. It was a low, haunting melody, a funeral dirge that seemed to vibrate in the very air between them. The sound was terrifying, a melodic warning that James was ready to bury whatever problem stood in front of him. "I can't let you do that, sir," James said, the humming growing louder, more insistent. Marcus didn't think. He reacted. He swung his arm, the heavy glass Visionary of the Year award he'd been carrying since the stage hitting the guard's temple with a sickening thud. James grunted, the funeral song cutting off as he stumbled back. The two men crashed into the wall, the sound of the impact echoing down the hollow corridor like a gunshot. Marcus scrambled forward, his fingers clawing at the floor as he sought leverage. He felt the cold metal of the guard's belt, then something smaller, hard, and rectangular. A flash drive. It had fallen from James's pocket during the scuffle. Marcus snatched it up, the plastic biting into his palm, and delivered one final, desperate shove. James hit the floor hard, his head bouncing off the linoleum. Panting, Marcus leaned against the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked at the flash drive. It was encrypted, the black casing unmarked. This wasn't supposed to be here. James wasn't just a guard. He was a courier. "Marcus?" The voice was soft, hesitant. Marcus spun around, hiding the drive in his fist. Sarah Johnson stood at the end of the hall. She looked small against the vast, white walls. She was hugging herself, her fingers picking at the hem of her blazer. "Sarah, thank God," Marcus breathed, stepping toward her. "I need you to take this. I need to get to the terminal. David, he's sabotaging the whole thing. I have to wipe the logs before the SEC sees the ghost entries." He reached out to her, his hands shaking. He needed her loyalty. She was the one person in this den of vipers who didn't have a price. She was the polite Sarah who apologized to chairs. "I've been so worried, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling. She stepped into the light of the flickering overhead bulb. I didn't know what to do. Everything you said on the stage, it was all a lie, wasn't it? It was a strategy, Sarah. To save the company. To save you, Marcus pleaded. He felt the sweat slicking his palms. Listen to me. I've got the proof right here. David is working with someone. I just need to clear my name from the ledger. Subverted. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're the only one I can trust, Sarah. Look at this place. It's full of ghosts. I've made mistakes, yes. I moved the funds, I signed the Q3 offsets. But I did it to keep the lights on. I did it for the legacy. If the feds get in now, they'll see the transfers I made to the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I need you to go to my office, take the laptop in the floor safe, and run the scrub sequence. Can you do that for me? He felt a wave of relief as he spoke. Admitting it felt like lancing a wound. Sarah had been with him since the beginning. She'd seen him build Aegis from a two-man operation in a garage in Palo Alto to this penthouse. She knew his heart. She would protect him because he was the only world she knew. Sarah nodded slowly, her blue eyes brimming with tears. I understand, Marcus. I really do. You were just trying to protect what we built. It's so much pressure, isn't it? Having everyone's lives in your hands. She reached out and touched his arm, a gentle, comforting gesture. Marcus felt his shoulders drop for the first time in 3 hours. His breathing slowed. The crisis wasn't over, but he had an ally. He wasn't alone in the dark. Thank you, Sarah, he whispered, squeezing her hand. I'll make this right. I'll get us through this. Sarah pulled back slightly, her hand going to the lapel of her jacket. She adjusted a small silver brooch, a simple lily Marcus had given her for her 3rd anniversary with the firm. I know you will, Marcus. You always have a plan. She paused, her gaze drifting to the wall behind him. Is that a microphone on the wall? Oh, sorry, I thought I saw something. Marcus frowned. He turned to look at the blank, white surface of the corridor. There was nothing there but the peeling paint and the shadow of the HVAC vent. A cold prickle danced across the back of his neck. Something was off. Sarah's posture had changed. The soft, mirroring slump of her shoulders had vanished, replaced by a rigid, military stillness. Sarah, he asked, turning back. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at a small, black device she had pulled from her pocket, a receiver with a glowing green light. She reached up to her ear and pulled out a tiny, flesh-colored bud. Agent Kelly? She said, her voice no longer trembling. It was flat, professional, and utterly devoid of the warmth that had been there seconds ago. I have it. Clear as a bell. The Cayman transfers, the Q3 offsets, the manual scrub request. He just gave us the whole roadmap. The world tilted. Marcus felt the floor beneath his feet turn to water. Behind Sarah, 2 men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow across the back rounded the corner. Robert Kelly, a man with tired eyes and thick spectacles, led them. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at the ceiling tiles, his lips moving in a silent, rhythmic count. 34, 35, Kelly muttered, before finally dropping his gaze to Marcus. Mr. Thorne. I believe you know Ms. Johnson. Or should I say, Special Agent Johnson. She's been on our payroll a lot longer than yours. Marcus looked at Sarah, the woman who apologized to Staplers, the woman he had trusted with his life. She didn't look away. She didn't look sorry. She simply stood there, the wire beneath her blazer a jagged line against her heart. She hadn't been mirroring his comfort. She had been mirroring his guilt to draw it out. Every sorry had been a shield, every kindness a lure. He hadn't just confessed to a friend. He had dictated his own indictment into a federal recorder. "Take him to the green room," Kelly ordered, his eyes already returning to the ceiling. "And get that flash drive. I want to know what James was carrying." The weight of the handcuffs, as they snapped around Marcus's wrists, was the only thing keeping him from falling. He had been so careful, so focused on David's betrayal, that he had walked straight into the arms of the one person he thought was too good to hurt him. The luck had run out. The coffee-stained socks were just fabric, and the fortress he had built was nothing but a cage. The FBI didn't take him to a cell, not yet. They led him back through the service corridors, a grim procession that felt like a march to the gallows. But instead of a precinct, they shoved him into the media suite. The room was a chaotic nest of black cables, monitors, and the smell of stale coffee. "You have a choice, Marcus," Robert Kelly said, leaning against a stack of equipment. He still wouldn't look Marcus in the eye, his gaze fixed on a flickering fluorescent light overhead. "The IPO is live. If you don't go out there for your scheduled CNBC interview in 10 minutes, the market will panic. Aegis stock will hit the floor before the first bell. We aren't ready to freeze the trades yet. We need to see where the money moves when you speak." "You want me to lie on national television?" Marcus rasped. His throat felt like it was filled with glass. "I want you to be the CEO everyone thinks you are," Kelly replied. "Sarah will be in the wings. Every word you say is being cross-referenced with the recording we just took. If you deviate, if you try to signal your lawyers or David, we shut it down and you go to central booking in a cage." Marcus was pushed into a chair. A makeup artist, her hands shaking, began to dab powder over the sweat on his forehead. He looked into the vanity mirror and saw a stranger. His angular jawline looked brittle, his eyes like hollowed-out craters. The door opened, and Jennifer Thorne walked in. His wife was a vision of cold, Manhattan perfection in a slate-gray dress and a diamond necklace that looked like a noose. She was clutching her leather-bound folio of receipts to her chest, her thumbnails picking at her cuticles until they bled. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice brittle. "The pilots. They called. The FBI is on the tarmac. The jet is grounded. They're seizing the house in the Hamptons, Marcus. Everything. My folio. I have the receipts for the jewelry. I told them it was my inheritance. But they won't listen." "Not now, Jennifer," Marcus said, his voice a ghost of itself. "You have to fix it," she hissed, leaning in. The cloying scent of her expensive perfume mingled with the ozone of the room, making Marcus nauseous. "If we lose the IPO, we lose the shield. Talk to William Davis. He's the interviewer. He's an idiot, Marcus. Use those big words he loves. Dazzle him. Just don't let them take the folio." She was unraveling. The woman who sorted her life by date was realizing that no amount of paper could protect her from the vacuum of a federal investigation. The stage manager signaled. Marcus was led into the small, soundproofed studio. William Davis sat in a swiveling leather chair, his face a mask of bronzed, symmetrical vacancy. As the cameras began to roll, William touched a small scar on his wrist, a rhythmic scratching motion. "We are here live with Marcus Thorne, the man of the hour," William boomed, his voice shifting into its professional, oily timbre. "Marcus, the Aegis IPO is being called the digital gold rush of the decade. But there are whispers, rumblings of technical inconsistencies in your Q3 reporting. How do you respond to the obfuscation of your data sets?" Marcus felt Sarah's gaze from the darkness behind the camera. He could almost hear the hum of the recorder. He forced a smile, the muscles in his face screaming with the effort. "William, obfuscation is a strong word for what is essentially a strategic realignment of our cloud architecture," Marcus said, his voice regaining some of its metronomic, clinical chill. "The delta between our projected revenue and the realized assets is a result of our aggressive expansion into the European markets. We are hedging against volatility, not hiding from it." He spoke for 20 minutes, a masterclass in transactional mathematics. He quantified the abstract, used the word net as a weapon, and framed the fraud as a valuation adjustment. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw William nodding, mesmerized by the complexity of the lies. William loved the sound of his own importance, and Marcus fed it to him in spoonfuls of jargon. But as the interview ended and the on-air light flickered off, the mask crumbled. Marcus stood up, his legs feeling like lead. He walked off the set and into the green room, where Sarah was waiting. "Your performance was perspicacious, Marcus," William Davis said, following him out. "A real tour de force of financial perpendicularity." Marcus ignored the man's nonsensical flattery. He looked at Sarah. She was holding a burner phone. "A call came in for you," she said, her voice cold. "The agents let it through. They want you to hear this." Marcus took the phone. His hand shook so violently, he almost dropped it. He pressed it to his ear. "I can help you, Marcus," a voice said. It was distorted, a digital rasp that sounded like wind through a graveyard. "The transit officials are in my pocket. I can get you a car to the border. I can get you past the FBI perimeter." "Who is this?" Marcus hissed. "A friend. But friends need tokens of affection. You have a flash drive. The one you took from James. I want it. If you don't deliver it to the cigar lounge in 10 minutes, the next alert the SEC receives won't be about revenue. It will be about the incident with your father's business 30 years ago. I have the bank records, Marcus. I know where the money really came from." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. His father, the liquidation, the shame that had driven him to build this empire. The voice knew the one thing he had spent his life redacting. "The cigar lounge," the voice repeated. 10 minutes, or the scoreboard goes dark forever." The phone went dead. Marcus looked at the room. The FBI agents, his trembling wife, the loyal assistant who had betrayed him. He was a rat in a maze, and the walls were starting to move. He pushed past the agents, the sheer desperation in his eyes momentarily stalling them. "I need a drink," he growled. "You've got your recording. Let me have 5 minutes of peace before you take me in." Robert Kelly looked up from his shoes. 38, 39? 5 minutes, Thorne. But Agent Johnson stays on your 6. Marcus didn't wait. He headed for the cigar lounge, the heavy mahogany doors promising a darkness he desperately craved. The room was oppressive, the smell of stale, wet tobacco thick enough to taste. It clung to his tuxedo like a greasy film. The lounge was supposed to be empty, but as Marcus stepped inside, the shadows shifted. A group of men sat in the oversized leather chairs, men Marcus recognized from the front rows of his shareholder meetings. These weren't the venture capitalists. These were the old money investors, the ones who had put their retirement funds into Aegis on the strength of Marcus's name. Thomas Wright, a barrel-chested man with hands like industrial clamps, stood up. He moved too close, invading Marcus's space, his breath smelling of peppermint and rage. Thomas's hands were raw, red from the triple wash ritual he performed after every contact. "Where's our money, Thorne?" Thomas asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. We heard the rumors. The SEC is inside. The servers are down. My daughter's trust, my retirement. You pissed it away on a ghost. It's a temporary fluctuation, Thomas, Marcus said, trying to maintain his ledger-balanced tone. The net positive is still... Don't give me the net bullshit, Thomas roared. He grabbed Marcus by the lapels, the force of it rattling Marcus's brain. You're a fraud. You're the same kind of filth that killed my little girl. Invisible, spreading, destroying everything you touch. A second man stood up, then a third. The room, already small, felt like it was collapsing inward. Marcus looked for Sarah, but she was obscured by the smoke and the bodies. I have the drive, Marcus shouted, reaching into his pocket. I can fix it. But Thomas wasn't listening. He swung a heavy, raw fist, the blow catching Marcus in the jaw. The world exploded in a spray of red and white. Marcus hit the floor, the taste of copper filling his mouth. The investors swarmed, a chaotic brawl of expensive suits and desperate rage. Marcus crawled, his fingers scratching at the thick carpet. He saw the glint of the brass ashtray on the central table, overflowing with cigarette butts, all of them smeared with that identical, haunting red lipstick. He didn't have time to wonder why. He saw a small wooden door behind the bar, the laundry chute. With a burst of adrenaline born of pure terror, Marcus kicked out at Thomas's shins and lunged for the door. He scrambled inside, the narrow, vertical tunnel of galvanized steel offering no grip. He didn't look back. He threw himself into the darkness. The descent was a terminal scream of rushing air and cold metal. He bounced off the sides, the hollow whistling of the chute sounding like a human voice trapped in the distance. He felt a sharp sting as his hip hit the metal rim. And then he was falling, truly falling, into the lightless void of the hotel's bowels. He landed in a heap of damp, heavy linens. The smell of bleach and sour sweat was overwhelming. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, his body a map of pain. He reached into his pocket. The flash drive was still there. He sat up, shivering in the cold basement air. The silence here was profound, a forgotten tomb beneath the noise of the world above. He saw a maintenance terminal glowing in the corner, its screen a pale blue in the gloom. He dragged himself to the desk and jammed the drive into the port. His fingers were stained with fresh, wet blue paint from the rim of the chute, a detail that made no sense. But he didn't care. He needed to know. The drive bypassed the hotel's security with a surgical precision that screamed of David's handiwork. But as the files opened, Marcus's heart stopped. The offshore accounts weren't David's. They weren't Marcus's. The names on the shell companies, Aegis Sentinel, Blue Sky Holdings, Piera Management, all funneled into a single master account. The signature on the digital incorporation papers was a sharp, elegant script he had seen 1,000 times. Eleanor Vance, his mentor. The woman who had taught him that emotions were liabilities. The woman who had given him his first 10 million. She wasn't his protector. She was the architect. She had been draining Aegis for years, using David as her hands and Marcus as her face. She had built him up just to have a mountain to hide behind when the storm broke. Marcus leaned back, the cold of the basement seeping into his bones. He looked at the row of vintage-made uniforms hanging on a rack nearby. Tiny, child-sized things that looked like they belonged in a museum of nightmares. He realized then that he was never the king. He was just another pawn in a game that had started long before he even knew the rules. The Department of Justice notification flashed on the screen, a final, crimson gavel strike. All assets frozen. Midnight deadline for compliance filing. He had 2 hours. 2 hours to prove he was a fool instead of a thief. He saw a glimmer of hope in the sea of data. A back door. A hidden sequence in the Aegis kernel that David had mentioned once during a late-night coding session. A break glass in case of emergency override that could expose the true origin of the transfers. But it was locked. It required a biometric signature, David's signature. Marcus stood up, his jaw set. He knew where David would be. The extraction. The voice on the phone had mentioned the transit officials. The rooftop. He found the service stairs and began to climb. His legs burned, his lungs felt like they were filled with hot coals, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the door to the roof and was hit by a physical assault of wind and rain. The rooftop helipad was a chaotic nightmare. The wind whipped his tuxedo jacket, the cold biting through his shirt in seconds. The yellow H on the landing pad, composed of thousands of tiny gold flakes, shimmered under the strobe of the lightning. David Miller stood near the edge, his receding hairline slicked back by the rain. He was staring at the horizon, where the searchlights of police helicopters were already beginning to cut through the clouds. "David!" Marcus screamed over the roar of the wind. David turned, his left eye twitching violently. He looked at Marcus and laughed, a thin, reedy sound that was lost in the gale. "You're late, Marcus. The bird is coming. Eleanor doesn't like to wait." "She's burning you, David. I saw the drive. You're the fall guy for her accounts." David's smile didn't falter. He tapped his watch 3 times. 1, 2, 3. "I'm the architect, Marcus. You're just the guy who didn't check the blueprints." Marcus lunged. The 2 men collided on the rain-slicked concrete. It was a desperate, ugly struggle. They rolled toward the edge, the city of Manhattan a dizzying drop of light and steel below them. David clawed at Marcus's eyes, his breath hot and smelling of fear. Marcus managed to get a hand around David's throat, pinning him against the terminal housing the rooftop server node. The wind howled, a banshee scream that seemed to cheer them on. "The back door, David. Give me the signature." "You want the truth, Marcus?" David gasped, his face turning a bruised purple. "You want to see what's behind the curtain? Fine. Let's show the world who you really are." With a sudden, violent movement, David slammed his hand onto the biometric scanner on the side of the housing. The screen flashed green. "Override initiated," a mechanical voice announced, barely audible over the storm. Marcus let go, a surge of triumph washing through him. "It's over, David. The files are uploading. Eleanor is done." Subverted. Marcus watched the progress bar on the small terminal screen. 10%, 40%, 80%. He felt a sudden, profound sense of peace. He had done it. He had outmaneuvered the woman who thought he was a chess piece. He had saved his legacy. He looked at David, expecting to see terror, expecting to see the realization of defeat. But David was laughing. It started as a giggle and grew into a full-throated roar that seemed to mock the thunder. He wasn't trying to run. He wasn't trying to fight. He was leaning against the server housing, clutching his sides. "You really are a visionary, Marcus," David wheezed. "You see things that aren't there. You think you're uploading evidence? You think this is the save button?" Marcus looked back at the screen. The progress bar hit 100%. But instead of a transfer complete message, the screen turned a blinding, toxic red. Command: Total data purge initiated. Source: Administrative override, M. Thorne. Status: Irreversible. What is this? Marcus stammered. He lunged for the keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys. "Stop it. Cancel command." "You can't," David said, his voice suddenly cold and clear. "That wasn't a back door to the truth, Marcus. It was a Trojan horse. Eleanor knew you'd find it. She knew you'd be desperate enough to use it. By using my signature and your administrative credentials, you just manually wiped every server in the Aegis network. Every log, every transfer record, every shred of evidence that Eleanor ever existed. Marcus felt the world dissolve. He looked at his hands, the hands that had just triggered the destruction of his own company. And the best part? David continued, stepping closer. He pulled a small, high-end recorder from his pocket. I've been recording this whole confrontation. The part where you forced me to scan my hand. The part where you screamed about clearing your name by any means necessary. To the FBI, it's going to look like you cornered your CTO and forced him to help you destroy the evidence before they could reach the roof. Marcus looked up. The police helicopters were here. The searchlights swept across the roof, blinding him, pinning him like a moth to a board. The roar of the engines drowned out everything else. You didn't save yourself, Marcus, David shouted over the noise. You just pulled the trigger on your own execution. You're not the architect. You're the evidence. David stepped back, raising his hands as the first tactical team rappelled onto the roof. He looked like a victim. He looked like a man who had been terrorized. Marcus stood alone by the terminal, the red light of the purge reflected in his eyes. He had used his intelligence, his technical skill, and his desperate will to survive. And every single one of those things had been turned into a weapon against him. He had no digital footprint left. He had no proof. He was a man standing on a pile of ashes, holding the match. The ride to the precinct was a blur of rain and sirens. Marcus sat in the back of the squad car, the heavy steel of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Outside the window, the crowds around the Pierre Hotel were jeering, their faces distorted by the wet glass. They were watching the fall of a titan, and they were loving every second of it. Marcus leaned his head against the cold window. He thought about his father. He thought about the lucky socks he was still wearing. He realized that the superstition wasn't about the coffee stain. It was about the fear of being seen for what he actually was, a man who thought he could control the wind. But as the car turned onto a side street, a thought flickered in his mind. A small, technical detail. The Aegis servers used a triple redundancy lag. It was a feature he had insisted on, a 5-minute delay in total purges to prevent accidental deletions. David knew the code, but David hadn't been a developer in years. He was a manager now. He had forgotten the heartbeat protocol. Marcus looked at the lead agent in the front seat, Robert Kelly. The man was staring at the dashboard, his lips moving. 82, 83. Agent Kelly, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I need a laptop right now. Forget it, Thorne. You're done. The purge, Marcus hissed. It's not finished. There's a 5-minute lag in the basement server at the Pierre. David didn't wipe the physical backups because he thought the digital override would catch them. If you give me access to the DOJ portal, I can reroute the audit trails before the lag expires. I can show you David's hidden server, the one Eleanor doesn't know about. Kelly paused. He turned around, his thick spectacles magnifying his tired eyes. He didn't look at Marcus's face. He looked at his tie. Why would you do that? Kelly asked. It won't save you. You've already confessed to the wire. I know, Marcus said. I'm going to prison. But I'm not going alone. And I'm not letting Eleanor Vance walk away with my father's name in her pocket. Kelly looked at the ceiling of the car, then back at Marcus. He reached into his bag and pulled out a ruggedized laptop. 3 minutes, Thorne. That's all the lag you've got left. Marcus's fingers moved with a phantom grace. He wasn't a CEO now. He wasn't a billionaire. He was the kid in the garage again, the one who saw the beauty in the logic. He bypassed his own security, navigated the cooling fan protocols, and found the ghost in the machine. He didn't scrub his own name. He didn't try to hide the Cayman transfers. Instead, he opened a direct pipe from the Pierre basement server to the DOJ's mainframe. He flooded their system with the truth, not the polished, net positive truth of the IPO, but the raw, ugly data of Eleanor's theft. "Done," he whispered, as the screen finally went black. The sunrise over the Manhattan skyline was a pale, bruised purple. Marcus sat on a hard wooden bench in the precinct, his tuxedo ruined, his hands empty. He was stripped of his wealth, his company, and his reputation. But for the first time in 30 years, he wasn't checking his ankles. He wasn't waiting for the luck to run out. Eleanor Vance had been arrested at Teterboro Airport an hour ago. David Miller was in an interrogation room 3 doors down, his yes and charm failing him as the forensic accountants tore through his hidden server. Marcus watched the light catch the glass of the skyscrapers across the river. He had lost the world, but he had found the scoreboard. And for the first time, the numbers finally added up. He took a deep breath of the stale precinct air, closed his eyes, and listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard.